Hollywood stopped breathing the day Michelle Pfeiffer re-emerged. Cameras froze, producers whispered, and every headline screamed the same truth. The Queen was back, and she no longer played by anyone's rules. At 67, the woman once dismissed as too shy, too soft, now ruled an empire built on silence and control. Her name alone could still tilt the stock of a studio, yet she lived behind tall hedges in Pacific Palisades, moving like a ghost through her own legend. What shocked the world wasn't her wealth, the $25 million estate, the vintage Cadillac, the Tesla for conscience, but the calm that came with it. Pfeiffer had survived Hollywood's cruelest decades and returned untouched by its poison. The tabloids had nothing left to devour. The woman they once hunted had become untouchable. Behind the polished gates, she tended roses where others built monuments, proof that power can whisper louder than fame. For younger actresses, her comeback felt like an earthquake, a reminder that beauty doesn't expire and grace can outlast the machine. Industry insiders still recall the shockwave the moment she turned down 3 blockbuster roles in 1 week, choosing her piece over another trophy. It wasn't rebellion, it was evolution. The quiet cashier from Santa Ana had become the only person in Hollywood who didn't need Hollywood. When she stepped onto the red carpet again, journalists stopped asking about age. They asked how she managed to turn time itself into an ally. The answer shimmered in her eyes. Discipline, loss, forgiveness, endurance. The invisible empire no studio could buy. That's why her return wasn't nostalgia. It was a reckoning. The industry that once tried to define her now bowed to her definition. And for a brief, breathless moment, everyone watching understood the shock of it all. Michelle Pfeiffer hadn't aged. She had ascended. The shock of Michelle Pfeiffer's return wasn't born overnight. It was forged decades earlier. In a quiet war, she fought against Hollywood itself. Long before the gates of her Pacific sanctuary closed on the world, she had been the trembling newcomer no one believed in. When she arrived in Los Angeles in the late 1970s, she brought little more than a second-hand car, a few dollars saved from her supermarket shifts, and a fragile kind of courage. The city was merciless. Casting rooms full of polished smiles and predatory eyes reduced her to a single phrase: "You're beautiful." It was both compliment and curse. Producers saw the face, never the fire. She was hired to decorate, not to speak. Then came Grease 2-6, her first leading role and her public humiliation. Critics shredded her. Pretty but empty. That night, she drove home through the neon haze, headlights cutting through tears she refused to shed. But failure for her was not an ending. It was ignition. She studied harder, auditioned relentlessly, and learned to sharpen her stillness until it spoke louder than dialogue. In 1983, that stillness erupted on screen as Elvira Hancock in Scarface. The moment she appeared beside Al Pacino, the world stopped seeing her as a decoration and started fearing her as a force. The performance was ice and flame, grace and danger, wrapped in a single glance. Overnight, she became the frozen heartbeat of an era. Yet the more she shone, the more it cost her. Between The Witches of Eastwick and Dangerous Liaisons, she transformed exhaustion into art, winning her first Oscar nomination while silently unraveling inside. Hollywood demanded her perfection daily, and she delivered, even when it meant sleeping in her car between shoots. She worked until her voice cracked, until applause drowned out her own thoughts. Then came The Fabulous Baker Boys, a role that changed everything. Dressed in red satin, sliding across a piano, she turned vulnerability into seduction, exhaustion into triumph. Crew members wept during filming. The world called her flawless, but the truth was raw. She was bleeding inside, surviving on willpower and instinct. By 1992, Batman Returns confirmed what no one dared deny. Michelle Pfeiffer wasn't competing with Hollywood's men anymore. She was eclipsing them. Catwoman wasn't just a costume, it was prophecy. A woman breaking free from the system that tried to tame her. But fame is a cruel lover. It devours what it adores. In the same years that made her a legend, Pfeiffer felt herself hollowing out. Every script came with a higher price. Her time, her privacy, her peace. The irony was devastating. She had climbed to the top only to discover there was no air left to breathe. Her beauty became myth. Her success became isolation. "I was living everyone's dream," she once said quietly. "But I had forgotten what mine was." That's when she did the unthinkable. At the height of her power, Michelle Pfeiffer began to disappear. She turned down multi-million-dollar offers, stepped back from red carpets, and built her life behind walls that fame could not breach. To Hollywood, it was a scandal. How could its brightest star choose silence? But to her, it was salvation. She had spent decades fighting to be seen. Now she wanted only to exist. It was the most shocking act of rebellion she ever performed. Not a line delivered on camera, but a choice made in real life. And in that choice, she became untouchable. The silence Michelle Pfeiffer chose was not retreat. It was rebirth. In a city that feeds on exposure, she weaponized invisibility. For years, Hollywood kept knocking on her door with offers that could have made her even richer, but she was done chasing applause. She wanted her life back. The decision stunned everyone. Studio executives called it madness, tabloids called it mystery, but Michelle called it survival. She had spent half her life becoming a legend and the other half trying to remember who she was before the cameras found her. When the noise faded, she finally heard her own heartbeat again. In that quiet, she met something unexpected. Love that didn't need to be staged. It was 1993, and she was still carrying the bruises of her first marriage. Then came David E. Kelley, a writer whose calm intelligence felt like the opposite of everything she'd known in Hollywood. Their meeting wasn't a PR setup or a gala introduction. It was a blind date arranged by a friend. Something small, human, ordinary. The shocking part wasn't that sparks flew. It was what came after. When she told him she was in the process of adopting a baby girl, Claudia Rose, he didn't hesitate. "Then I guess I'm meeting my daughter soon," he said. That simple line, delivered without calculation, became the turning point of her life. They married within the year, quietly, away from the flash of cameras. Gone were the red carpets and screaming crowds. The ceremony was intimate, more promise than performance. For the first time, Michelle wasn't creating a role. She was creating a home. A year later, they welcomed their son, John Henry, and the rhythm of her life changed forever. The woman who once measured her worth by the number of scripts on her desk now found meaning in cereal bowls, bedtime stories, and laughter echoing through the kitchen. "I didn't quit acting," she said later. "I just chose my life." That choice, radical for someone of her fame, became the core of her new identity. While David built worlds on television with Ally McBeal and The Practice, Michelle built something more fragile but enduring: stillness. She learned that love doesn't need fireworks. It needs patience. There were hard seasons, years of distance, long hours, the fatigue of raising children under the magnifying glass of fame, but they endured. They fought gently, forgave quickly, and never forgot to laugh. In a city where most love stories burn out fast, theirs became a quiet miracle. But even peace carries shadows. The deaths of her parents hit her like slow earthquakes. Her father, Richard, passed in 1998, the man who had worked his hands raw to hold his family together. She was filming, adored by millions, but inside she was a child again, lost in a silence that no applause could fill. "After my father died," she later said, "I learned what quiet really means." Years later, when her mother, Donna Jean, followed him, the world didn't collapse, it drifted. Her mother had been the gravity that kept her grounded. Without her, everything floated. Michelle moved slower, spoke softer, carrying her grief like an heirloom. She found solace in small rituals, watering her garden, folding napkins the way her mother did, whispering to the air, "Can you see me, Mom?" As if the universe wasn't done testing her heart, more losses came. Jonathan Demme, the director who first saw beyond her beauty, died in 2017. Then in 2022, Ray Liotta, her co-star and friend, was gone. She never made public statements. She mourned in private, sitting in her garden until sunset, letting the wind carry her thank yous. "He changed how I saw myself," she said softly about Demme. About Liotta, she simply said, "He was so kind." For a woman who had spent decades performing for the world, grief became her last honest role. No script, no lights, only truth. Yet somehow, Michelle never surrendered to sadness. She turned every loss into light. Her home became her sanctuary. Quiet rooms, golden California sunsets, framed drawings from her children on the wall, the same piano she once played in The Fabulous Baker Boys, resting in a corner. She still worked, but on her own terms, choosing scripts that whispered instead of shouted. In French Exit, she showed fragility as elegance. In Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, she carried power with grace. And in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, she reminded the world that even in a universe of superheroes, humanity is still the most magnetic force of all. Today, her life feels less like a career and more like a composition, a symphony of resilience, love, and quiet rebellion. Her body of work spans over 40 years. Her fortune exceeds $250 million, yet none of it defines her. What defines her is balance. She walks miles every morning, practices yoga, eats clean, and advocates for a toxin-free world through the Environmental Working Group. Her beauty has changed. It's no longer the flawless illusion that once hypnotized audiences, but the earned radiance of someone who has lived fully and forgiven deeply. The lines on her face are not flaws. They are coordinates to a life survived with grace. When asked what legacy she hopes to leave, she doesn't mention Oscars or money. She says only, kindness. I hope I'm remembered for kindness. In an industry built on noise, Michelle Pfeiffer remains the quietest and strongest voice of all. A woman who turned her pain into poetry and her silence into power. That is the true shock of her story. She didn't just survive Hollywood, she transcended it. When the applause fades and the cameras dim, the legend of Michelle Pfeiffer becomes even more hypnotic. What the public rarely saw was the quiet rebellion that defined her later years. A refusal to let Hollywood decide what a woman's worth should look like. After 4 decades of relentless spotlight, she began rewriting the rules from within her sanctuary. Each choice she made carried shockwaves, saying no to blockbuster franchises, yes to independent films that challenged emotion over spectacle, rejecting vanity endorsements while pouring silent millions into environmental and children's health charities. Her fortune kept growing, but her motives became disarmingly pure. Not power, not status, but legacy. She had built something rarer than fame: sovereignty. Inside her Pacific Palisades home, nothing gleams unnecessarily. Wood, glass, sunlight, and stillness replace marble and mirrors. The same woman who once ruled the box office now tends orchids at dawn and walks barefoot across her garden at dusk. Those close to her say she's addicted to quiet, that after years of chaos, silence became her oxygen. Yet that peace didn't come cheaply. She had to survive the kind of emotional demolition that would have ended most careers, the isolation of superstardom, the sting of critical betrayal, the loneliness of losing almost everyone who anchored her. Every tear, every sleepless night carved a new contour into her grace. Industry insiders still recall the disbelief when her 1990s contracts reached $12 million a film, unheard of for an actress at the time. And yet, just as Hollywood finally worshipped her, she began stepping away. To executives, it was insanity. To the public, mystery. To Michelle, clarity. She had seen the cost of constant exposure. Fame feeds on fear, the fear of disappearing, and she had none left. Her decision to vanish was a statement more powerful than any speech. She proved that control isn't about clinging to relevance, but about letting go of dependency. Still, she never stopped creating. Her later roles carried the calm danger of a woman who'd seen everything and needed to prove nothing. In French, Exit, her face told 1,000 quiet tragedies. In Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, her regal cruelty was laced with exhaustion and empathy, and in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, she reminded the blockbuster world that heart can steal scenes even from CGI. Critics called her a master of silence, an actress who could fracture hearts with a single look. The compliment was fitting. Silence had always been her sharpest weapon. Away from the lens, Michelle transformed into an advocate cloaked in humility. She championed toxin-free living, clean food, and environmental justice through the Environmental Working Group, speaking softly but influencing millions. She once said, "You can't control everything, but you can live kindly toward your body, your family, and the planet." Her activism mirrors her artistry, disciplined, subtle, quietly revolutionary. Even her physical presence defies the industry's obsession with youth. At 67, her face carries lines like calligraphy, proof of laughter, loss, and endurance. She has become the antidote to Hollywood's illusion, showing that beauty isn't the absence of age, but the presence of authenticity. Her daily life reads like a poem of balance. Yoga at sunrise, vegan meals she often cooks herself, long coastal drives in a black Mercedes S-Class or her Tesla Model S. The hum of the electric motor replacing the roar of applause. The truest shock of all is how fully she has redefined success. No longer measured by awards or headlines, it now lives in her children's laughter, in her marriage's quiet longevity, in the serenity that follows every storm she endured. Claudia Rose and John Henry grew up far from the circus of fame, learning that greatness is not noise, but integrity. When Michelle speaks of them, her voice softens into awe. "Motherhood didn't slow me down," she says. "It gave everything meaning." And so the story circles back to where it began, a shy cashier from Santa Ana who turned invisibility into immortality. In a world that worships chaos, she built her legend from stillness. She doesn't chase time. Time now follows her. That is why her presence still shakes Hollywood to its core. Because Michelle Pfeiffer didn't just survive the system, she transcended it and in doing so exposed its fragility. Her greatest performance has never been on screen. It is the quiet, unwavering act of living beautifully, truthfully, and entirely on her own terms. There comes a moment in every legend's life when the spotlight grows softer, when the applause turns into memory and only truth remains. For Michelle Pfeiffer, that moment didn't signal decline. It revealed transcendence. She now stands beyond comparison, the rare figure whose silence speaks more powerfully than any public statement. What shocks observers most today isn't her age-defying beauty or her fortune, but her emotional precision, the way she has turned existence itself into art. From her hilltop home, mornings unfold in deliberate quiet. She brews coffee while sunlight filters through wide windows, her movements unhurried, as if every second must be felt, not consumed. Those who visit describe an atmosphere that borders on spiritual stillness. There's the faint scent of lavender, a piano resting against the wall, the garden visible through glass doors. This is where one of the greatest actresses alive begins her day, without entourage, without performance, surrounded only by the remnants of a life honestly lived. The industry that once tried to own her still trembles at her influence. When she appears at an awards show, dressed in understated black or silver, the room changes temperature. Younger stars study her posture, her restraint, trying to decode the secret. But there is no trick. The power lies in what she withholds. She never oversells emotion, never chases attention, and yet every camera instinctively finds her. It's a kind of gravitational pull born from decades of authenticity. Her return to selective filmmaking has been another revelation. Critics note that she now acts as if she's writing poetry instead of dialogue. In French Exit, her face carries entire paragraphs of regret without a word spoken. In Mother and Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, she commands the screen not by volume but by presence, still deliberate, undeniable. The same vulnerability that once made her a target in her youth has become her strongest weapon. Time hasn't dulled her magnetism, it has deepened it. Off-screen, her values shape every choice. She invests quietly in sustainable farming initiatives, green energy startups, and educational charities. She donates to cancer research, to the Humane Society, and to children's health foundations, rarely allowing her name to be attached. Doing good doesn't need an audience, she once told a reporter. Her generosity mirrors her performances, measured, sincere, never seeking applause. The woman who once feared invisibility now embraces it as freedom. Fame, she has learned, is not a promise. It's a test. And the only way to win is to stop playing by its rules. In interviews she gives sparingly, she speaks about self-respect as the final frontier for women in entertainment. "You have to know when enough is enough," she says. "Otherwise, the world will decide that for you." Her words carry the weight of survival. Those close to her describe a life of ritual simplicity. Early yoga in the garden, writing notes to her husband on the kitchen counter, evening walks barefoot through wet grass. Sometimes she stops to watch the sky shift over the Pacific and whispers, almost to herself, "I made it through." It isn't arrogance, it's gratitude. Every loss she's endured, every heartbreak and betrayal, now feels like part of a necessary purification. Financially, she remains one of the wealthiest self-made women in Hollywood. But she wears success like a whisper. No designer excess, no calculated mystique, just the quiet proof that grace and intelligence can build empires as surely as ambition. Her children are adults now, independent and kind, reflections of the balance she fought to protect. When asked what makes her proudest, she doesn't mention money or fame. That they're good people, she says simply. As she moves through this new era, her legacy grows clearer. Michelle Pfeiffer stands as the antithesis of the disposable celebrity, the living evidence that artistry and humanity can coexist. She's the blueprint for endurance, for finding light without destroying your soul in the process. In an industry that measures worth in headlines, she measures hers in peace. Perhaps that's why her story resonates so deeply today, because every generation, amid the noise and hunger of fame, needs someone to remind them that the loudest strength is quiet, that true beauty survives not in perfection, but in presence. Michelle Pfeiffer has become that reminder. Her life is no longer about performance, it's about meaning. And in a world still obsessed with fleeting glory, she stands like a monument carved from silence, steady, luminous, eternal. It is strange how certain lives stop belonging to time. Michelle Pfeiffer's life has reached that point, no longer measured in years or headlines, but in what it represents: endurance, integrity, and the victory of grace over noise. At 67, she has become what Hollywood rarely produces anymore, a soul uncorrupted by fame. Her story now reads like an allegory for survival, a blueprint for anyone who has ever felt unseen, dismissed, or misunderstood. Because the truth is, Michelle didn't just survive the system, she rewrote it from within, turning every scar into a lesson and every silence into strength. In the twilight of her career, there is a profound serenity to the way she carries herself. She no longer performs for cameras, but for the quiet dignity of life itself. Friends say she moves through her home like a woman who has finally made peace with her ghosts. The same garden that once caught her tears now holds laughter, her children visiting, her husband calling from another room, the sound of piano keys touched lightly at dusk. Nothing dramatic, nothing staged, just fragments of peace that to her feel worth more than any trophy. What shocks younger generations most is her freedom. While many chase youth through filters and desperation, Pfeiffer embraces evolution. She allows the years to paint her face like an artist's brush, each line a lyric, each gray strand a testament to continuity. "You can't outrun time," she once said, "but you can walk beside it." That acceptance has become her superpower. When she steps onto a red carpet now, she doesn't arrive to compete, she arrives to remind. Her presence alone is a quiet revolt, against erasure, against fear, against the belief that a woman's power fades with age. Her wealth, though vast, is almost irrelevant compared to what she has built internally. The $250 million empire, the production company, the homes in Pacific Palisades and Woodside, they are less trophies and more symbols of self-determination. She never inherited a fortune or married into power, she created both. Every contract she signed was written in sweat and sleepless nights. Every dollar she earned carried the echo of a supermarket cashier who once counted quarters for gas. That is why her success feels so earned. Not a spectacle, but a sanctuary built on effort and endurance. Yet even now, she refuses to mythologize herself. "I'm still learning," she told a journalist recently. "Every day, I'm still figuring it out." There's humility in that, the kind that disarms cynics. Because behind the perfect posture and timeless poise is still the young girl from Santa Ana, shy, uncertain, stubbornly hopeful. The fire never left her, it simply changed temperature. Her philanthropy remains discreet but constant. Millions donated quietly to cancer research, to environmental reform, to children's education, not for credit, but for impact. She mentors young actresses privately, warning them that fame without grounding is a form of slow drowning. "Keep a life outside of the frame," she tells them. "That's what saves you." For those who listen, it's not just advice, it's prophecy. And yet, despite her quiet living, her cultural resonance continues to expand. Every few years, a new generation rediscovers Scarface or Batman Returns and falls under the same spell. They see Elvira Hancock or Catwoman and feel something timeless: desire, power, melancholy, all distilled into one human heartbeat. Pfeiffer's performances have become cinematic relics, still pulsing with relevance decades later. In an era where fame expires overnight, she remains immune. Because authenticity doesn't age, it accumulates. When she speaks of legacy now, her voice softens. "I think legacy is how you treat people," she says, "how you make them feel when you're not acting." Perhaps that is the truest ending to her story. Not applause, but affection. Not glitter, but gratitude. Her life has become proof that greatness doesn't need to shout, that strength can exist in restraint, and that beauty, real, enduring beauty, is born not of perfection, but of truth. Sometimes, when the evening light slips through her window and the Pacific glows gold, Michelle Pfeiffer sits at her piano again. Her fingers find old melodies, not for an audience, but for memory. Each note carries echoes of who she once was: the cashier, the actress, the wife, the mother, the survivor. The music drifts into the air, weightless and endless, like her story itself. Because in the end, Michelle Pfeiffer didn't just live a remarkable life, she turned it into something rarer, a masterpiece of endurance and grace. She stands today not as a relic of what once was, but as a reminder of what still can be. That in a world addicted to spectacle, silence remains the final luxury, and she, its most radiant keeper. Every great story eventually turns inward, and Michelle Pfeiffer's does too. What remains after the fame, the love, the heartbreak, and the applause is a portrait of a woman who finally learned to live for herself. It's not the ending of a career. It's the evolution of a spirit. She has become the rare artist whose legacy expands quietly, not through controversy or reinvention, but through authenticity that refuses to fade. At 67, she no longer needs to prove anything, to Hollywood, to critics, or even to herself. The proof is in her presence. When Michelle walks into a room now, people feel the shift before they see her. There's no need for extravagant gowns or rehearsed smiles. Her calm carries more electricity than red carpet spectacle. That composure, that still power, is what captivates the new generation who grew up streaming her classics. For them, Scarface, Dangerous Liaisons, and Batman Returns aren't just films, they're mythology. And at the center of that mythology is a woman who turned fragility into dominance. She often says she lives two lives, the public story everyone knows, and the private rhythm she protects fiercely. Mornings are simple: yoga by the window, a walk through her garden, a call from one of her children. She tends to her roses the way she once approached a script, patiently, intuitively, with devotion. In her garden, time moves differently. The same hands that once gripped a microphone on a smoky film set now touch the earth, unhurried. Nature, she says, gives her what fame never could: forgiveness. Still, even in this piece, Michelle's mind never stops creating. She reads constantly: literature, philosophy, psychology, anything that reminds her that growth doesn't end with success. She journals, sketches, and sometimes returns to the piano late at night. Neighbors say they can hear faint music drifting from her house at twilight, notes from the fabulous Baker Boys. Soft, imperfect, human. It's as though she's speaking to her younger self, the girl who once felt invisible, telling her, "You made it. You're safe now. You're safe." Her husband, David E. Kelley, remains her quiet partner in everything. Their marriage, after 3 decades, has settled into a rhythm of mutual admiration. They rarely attend events together. They don't need to. They exist side by side, writing different kinds of stories but sharing the same truth: that love doesn't need noise to last. When asked about the secret to their longevity, she smiles and says, "We give each other space, and we never stop laughing." It's not glamorous, but it's real, and that, in the world they live in, is revolutionary. As for Hollywood, it still comes calling. Scripts arrive, directors plead, studios offer blank checks. Michelle reads them all, but accepts only what stirs her. "If I don't feel something, I don't do it," she explains. That instinct has kept her filmography lean but legendary. Every role she chooses now seems to mirror her own journey: complex, soulful, resilient. She has become a mirror for the women who watch her, a reminder that aging is not a vanishing act, but an evolution of power. Her fans call her timeless, but she resists that word. "Timeless sounds like I stopped living," she once said. "I'm still changing every day." And it's true. She hasn't frozen herself in nostalgia or perfection. She's still curious, still open to being surprised. She's the embodiment of what happens when a woman no longer needs permission to exist as she is. Even her physical beauty, long a subject of obsession, has taken on new meaning. It's no longer about symmetry or youth. It's about presence, the kind that comes from self-respect, from surviving the storms and coming out softer, not harder. The camera still loves her, but now it listens to her too. In interviews, she rarely talks about herself in grand terms. Instead, she turns the conversation toward gratitude: her parents' sacrifices, her children's laughter, her enduring friendships. "Everything I have came from the lessons they gave me," she says. "I just hope I've lived in a way that honors that." There's something haunting about the way she frames her story, not as triumph, but as transformation. She doesn't see her life as a collection of achievements, but as a continuous act of becoming. That's why her legacy feels alive, breathing beyond screens and scripts. Sometimes, When the day fades and the sky over California glows deep gold, Michelle stands at the edge of her garden and closes her eyes. She listens to the wind, to the ocean, to the invisible applause of a universe she no longer needs to impress. In that stillness lies the secret the world has chased for decades. Greatness isn't about being seen. It's about seeing clearly. And as twilight turns to night, the image is complete. The once invisible girl who became the world's most luminous mystery. Michelle Pfeiffer doesn't chase immortality. She already has it. Not in statues or awards, but in the quiet certainty that her story, of resilience, of endurance, of beauty born from truth, will echo long after the lights go out. Every legend eventually fades into myth, but Michelle Pfeiffer refuses to. Her story has entered that rare territory where art, endurance, and human truth blend into something larger than celebrity. The world no longer sees her as just an actress. She has become a symbol, an echo of everything fragile and fearless about being alive. Even after decades, her name still sends a shiver through Hollywood. Directors whisper it with reverence. Journalists tiptoe around it, knowing that behind the soft voice and unshakable poise lies a lifetime of storms survived in silence. When she appears in public now, it feels almost ceremonial. At premieres, she doesn't walk the carpet. She glides through it, every flashbulb capturing not vanity, but legacy. Her gaze carries the weight of someone who has seen fame at its brightest and loneliness at its darkest. Younger stars look at her and glimpse something both terrifying and inspiring, the proof that greatness isn't luck, it's endurance. She's the embodiment of contradiction, stillness with fire underneath, humility with unshakable command. Those who work with her today describe an aura that can't be rehearsed. On set, she doesn't demand attention, yet every room adjusts around her. She listens more than she speaks, studies every line until it breathes truth, and gives directors what they didn't know they needed. Her co-stars call her the eye of the storm. Calm, magnetic, devastatingly precise. When Michelle looks at you in a scene, one actor said, you feel like the world stops for a second. It's not acting anymore. It's something closer to spiritual presence. Off-screen, she has built a world so different from Hollywood that it feels almost like resistance. Her two homes in California are not fortresses of luxury, but sanctuaries of quiet. In Pacific Palisades, ivy climbs the walls and morning light pours through cedar windows. In Woodside, her garden stretches across 9 acres, surrounded by apple trees and whispering pines. She calls it her earthly cathedral. Here she finds meaning in tending to what grows slowly, in contrast to an industry obsessed with speed. Fame takes everything, she once said. The garden gives it back. Visitors often find her barefoot, her hands covered in soil, smiling in that unguarded way she never shows in photos. To see her like this is to understand why she has outlasted her generation. She no longer performs to exist. She simply is. Every detail of her life reflects this authenticity. The minimalism, the patience, the refusal to chase relevance. She has nothing left to prove, and that freedom radiates through every word she speaks. But even in peace, she carries her past with tenderness. The loss of her parents, the heartbreaks, the loneliness of youth, all have become part of her emotional vocabulary. They live quietly inside her performances, woven into every breath and gesture. Grief doesn't leave you, she told a close friend. It just changes shape. Some days it even feels like grace. Those who know her well say that this acceptance, this lack of bitterness, is her most beautiful evolution. The most surprising thing is how current she remains. In an era that discards women the moment they stop being 30, Michelle Pfeiffer is more relevant than ever, not because she tries to be, but because truth never goes out of style. Her name trends online every few months. A viral clip from Scarface, a fan tribute. A new interview that feels like a masterclass in emotional intelligence. Her face has become a kind of compass for authenticity in an age addicted to illusion. She continues to inspire not by teaching, but by being. Her legacy isn't built on scandal or spectacle, but on quiet defiance, choosing kindness over cynicism, silence over noise, and presence over performance. For every woman who's ever felt unseen, her life is a promise. You don't have to shout to be heard, and you don't have to fight to be strong. As evening settles over the California hills, Michelle sometimes steps outside with a cup of tea and watches the horizon burn into gold. The Pacific wind moves through the trees, soft and patient, like time itself bowing in her direction. The same woman who once walked barefoot home from a supermarket shift now stands at peace within a world she built from nothing but courage. That's the shock that never fades, the journey from invisibility to immortality, from a girl who whispered her dreams into the dark to a woman whose silence now fills the world. Michelle Pfeiffer has become more than a legend. She is the proof that grace, when lived fully, becomes a kind of power no fame can ever equal. And somewhere, beyond the applause and the memory of film reels spinning in the dark, her story continues, wordless, luminous, eternal. There's a particular silence that surrounds legends when they outlast their era, a reverent hush that feels less like absence and more like awe. That's where Michelle Pfeiffer lives now, in that golden quiet between memory and eternity. She no longer belongs to Hollywood's present, yet her shadow still stretches across it. Every generation that rediscovers her sees something different. The beauty, the danger, the poise, the melancholy. But beneath it all lies the same pulse, authenticity. Her influence isn't loud, but it's everywhere. The new wave of actresses often cite her as the blueprint, not just for her craft, but for how she navigated fame without losing herself. Zendaya once said in an interview, "Michelle Pfeiffer taught us that mystery is strength." That sentiment echoes throughout the industry. In an age of oversharing and endless exposure, Pfeiffer's restraint has become radical. She taught a generation that privacy isn't a weakness, it's the last form of power. Her filmography, revisited through time, feels almost prophetic. Scarface remains a time capsule of the American dream turned poison. The Fabulous Baker Boys still defines sensual honesty on screen. Dangerous Liaisons is studied in acting schools like a Shakespearean tragedy. And Batman Returns, her feral, wounded Catwoman, continues to inspire everything from runway fashion to modern feminist storytelling. Decades later, her characters still breathe, still haunt, still matter. But perhaps the greatest performance Michelle ever gave wasn't captured on film. It's the one she's living now. A life of balance, grounded in the ordinary miracles of quiet mornings and unhurried love. She has mastered the art of retreat without disappearance. The world sees her less often, but when she appears, in an interview, a charity gala, a film trailer, the collective breath catches. She doesn't need to announce relevance. Her existence redefines it. Friends describe her laughter as rare but disarming. It begins softly, then fills a room like sunlight breaking through curtains. She laughs like someone who's earned it, one longtime collaborator said. Maybe that's what happens when you've walked through loss and come out grateful. She's no longer chasing the applause of strangers. She's listening for the quiet approval of her own conscience. The beauty of her later years lies in contrast. The woman who once personified Hollywood's glamour now embodies something more powerful. Stillness. Her eyes, once used to seduce the camera, now see through it. She understands what the lens can't capture, the cost of being watched, the value of being real. That's why when she acts today, every moment feels heavier, truer, more dangerous. She doesn't perform emotion, she resurrects it. People often ask what keeps her going, what still drives her after 40 years of fame. Her answer, whispered rather than declared, is simple. Gratitude. Gratitude for her family, her health, her garden, her chance to live freely. Gratitude for every failure that built her, every heartbreak that deepened her art. "I used to think success was about more," she said once. "Now I know it's about less. Less noise, less fear, less pretending." In her home, the walls are lined not with awards but with photographs. Her children as toddlers, her parents smiling from another lifetime, candid shots from sets long gone. They are reminders of everything temporary and everything eternal. When she passes them in the hallway, she sometimes stops, smiles, and whispers, "Thank you." Michelle Pfeiffer's story isn't a fairy tale. It's a testament. Proof that real beauty outlives fashion, that integrity can survive fame, and that gentleness, when held with courage, can be stronger than steel. She began as a girl who felt invisible. She became a woman the world could never forget. And so her legend endures, not because of the movies, or the money, or even the magic of her face, but because she chose the rarest path of all, to remain human in a world that worships illusion. In that choice, Michelle Pfeiffer didn't just leave her mark on Hollywood, she carved her initials into the soul of its history. Some stories don't end. They echo. Michelle Pfeiffer's story is one of them. It's a melody that lingers long after the music stops, a reminder of what it means to be human in a world that too often forgets. She has walked through decades of noise and never lost her quiet-faced fame's cruelest illusions and never lost her soul. And now, as the world looks back at her life with wonder, it becomes clear. Michelle Pfeiffer isn't just a star. She's a lesson. About endurance, about dignity, about the sacred power of stillness. It's impossible not to feel something when you think of her journey. The shy California girl who once counted grocery money, the woman who faced rejection and ridicule, the artist who rose to define an era. She didn't fight her way into Hollywood by shouting louder than everyone else. She did it by being honest. Every glance, every silence, every heartbreak she portrayed was real. She gave us permission to feel deeply in a culture that often rewards emptiness. And that's why we love her. That's why we always will. Michelle's story is not about perfection. It's about perseverance. It's about daring to stay kind when the world demands hardness, about standing still when everything pushes you to move faster. She didn't let fame consume her. She learned to tame it. She didn't let age define her. She redefined beauty itself. Every wrinkle, every scar, every soft smile tells the story of a woman who lived fully, who hurt deeply, who loved without fear. And now, she stands as a beacon for all of us who've ever felt invisible, reminding us that visibility isn't what makes us real. Heart is. She shows us that you can lose, fall, break, and still rebuild with grace, that you can live quietly and still make the world listen. That greatness doesn't shout, it whispers. So as we close this chapter of her story, let's not treat it as a goodbye. Let's treat it as a thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for teaching us that strength can look gentle, that resilience can sound like silence, and that real beauty begins the moment you stop pretending. If this story moved you, if it made you remember why we fall in love with true artists, then let's keep her light alive together. Click that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel to help us celebrate lives that inspire, uplift, and remind us of our shared humanity. Every click, every share, every comment is not just for the algorithm, it's a tribute. A tribute to Michelle Pfeiffer and to all those who rise not by shouting, but by shining quietly. Because stories like hers are rare, they deserve to be told, remembered, and passed on. When you share her journey, you're not just supporting a video, you're keeping the flame of truth, empathy, and art alive. Let's make that flame visible. Let's honor her strength, her tenderness, her grace. Let's remind the world that kindness still matters, that authenticity still wins, and that silence, when lived with purpose, can be louder than applause. So take a breath, feel her story in your heart, and join us. Like, share, subscribe, not just for the legend, but for the light she leaves behind. Michelle Pfeiffer has shown us that a life lived with courage and compassion is the most beautiful performance of all. And together, by remembering her, we keep that performance eternal.